There we go. Hey, I'm curious, how many of you have seen that movie before? Yeah. How many of you have seen it 1,000 times? How many of you never want to see it again? Yeah. Yeah, every year they seem to do a new take on it. But if you can go back with me in your mind, think of 1957. I don't know where you were in 1957. I kind of where I was. Not around. Yeah. Not around. 1957. And there was a gentleman who had turned 53 years old. And he realized that something in his heart was just not right. It was just kind of the pressures of the year, the pressures of life. Actually, that year, his wife got diagnosed with a very bad illness, and she was sick. And he just thought, you know what? Something just doesn't feel right, and I can't even get into the Christmas spirit anymore. And this is what he wrote when people asked him how he was going to deal with this. This is what he thought. He thought, something has gone wrong with Christmas. I realized, or more likely, with me. So I wrote the story to see if I could rediscover something about Christmas that obviously I'd lost. We know this person as Dr. Seuss. And he's the person who wrote The Grinch. The Grinch was written because of this experience. He actually wrote the story to think through again for himself what Christmas is really about. And it's so profound that somebody would have the courage to write themselves into a story. His stepdaughter actually would later say that every time she read The Cat in the Hat, she thought that he was the Cat in the Hat on his best day and that he was the Grinch on his worst day. It takes a lot of courage to write your weaknesses into a story. More importantly, I don't know if you ever thought about this. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. For thousands of years, Christians have been trying to explain to others that at Christmas, God writes himself into our story. That God decides that the story of humanity is not how it should be unless he comes into it. And he enters the story. And you know what? We try in so many ways to try to explain that, to share that. We have movies, we have skits, we have music. But you know how hard it is to explain that God entered this story? Yeah, exactly. That's an amen. It's so difficult that we came up with a word to try to make it all come together, and the word is Christmas. Some of you might know this, but if you look up Christmas, it's not in the Bible. You can't find the word Christmas in the Bible. Like, I know people who, because the word Christmas is not in the Bible, like, oh, we just made it up. Oh, it's just a religious festival that people made up who are religious people to steal your money and to make you pretend that there's some God in the sky and all that stuff. So a lot of people who believe that. Maybe you're here, maybe you're listening online, maybe you know someone that believes that. But the truth is that thousands of years ago, these followers of Jesus, and before even Jesus was born, Jewish people were trying to make sense. God, what would it look like if you entered into our story? If you wrote yourself into the story of our world, what would that look like? Now, I want to tell you that at some point in our lives, we have to get honest enough to deal with what we think about Christmas. What do you believe about Christmas? Do you really believe that God came here in the form of a baby? Come on. Really? Think about how radical that would be. And how hard it is to really be like, yeah, I think I really do believe that. Or I think for some of you, you're thinking, I think I'm starting to believe that again. What would it look like for you for this Christmas to believe that not only God is writing himself into the story of humanity, but God somehow is trying to show you that he wants to be the story of your life as well. That he wants to play a part in some way in your own story, in your family story, in your kid's story, in your grandchildren's story. Because Christmas is when God says, hey, will you let me into your story? Will you let me somehow speak to you, show you something, even maybe make you believe just a little, something that you never thought was possible? This is very hard to do, by the way. This is one of the hardest things we get to do at Christmas. You know why this is so hard to do? And I'll be honest, because at some point in our society, this starts to happen. Tell me if this has happened to you. We start to believe that Christmas is just for the kids. Never happened to you? Like you remember being excited about Christmas. Maybe you remember being a kid. I still remember the first time my parents bought me the first Nintendo. Like the Nintendo console, right? That now is all kinds of different things. But I just think I still remember how excited I was. But then I got older. And then I thought, you know what? I'm not that excited anymore. But then you have kids. You know, some of you don't have kids yet. This Christmas might be the time. I don't know. But I'm just saying, you might meet someone lovely in church and start a relationship. That's what church is for. Well, one of the things. Anyway, so whatever. It's a whole other class on that. It's a whole other sermon series. So you have these moments where you're like, then you have kids or grandchildren. You're like, something about Christmas is so cute in the play, in the songs. But it's really about the kids. There's something in our culture that says if you're an adult, you should outgrow Christmas. That's what it means to be an adult. To be an adult is not to believe in Christmas, really. Hey, maybe you're religious, maybe you go to church, maybe, you'll read the Bible story, but really, you should at some point outgrow believing in Christmas if you're an adult. Has that ever happened to you? You remember feeling that moment where you're like, I don't really know if I believe this anymore. Like, it's nice and I'll be joyful for a little bit, but I don't know if I really believe the meaning of Christmas. I've had times in my life where that's happened, where I'm like, you know what, I'm not sure, like how the brokenness of this world, the pain, the violence, the things that I think of that we could talk about that the church has done to hurt people. I remember the first time I really got hurt in the context of a church, and I thought, I don't believe in any of this. This is ridiculous. And at some point, and I don't know exactly when it was, and I wish I was the kind of person that just wrote myself into a story, because I'd be rich. Right? There's this sense that you realize, I think I need to think about something that maybe I've lost deep inside about what I believe. And if I really believe this, and if I could really share this, and if I could really live in this, because Christmas maybe is not just for kids. Jesus, when he's actually alive and grown up and teaching, and people are starting to follow him, as he gets older, he shares something powerful about the power of kids to help us learn something deep about our faith. One point when he's teaching his disciples, this is what Jesus says about kids and the power of being a child. He says this, Jesus called a little child to him, kind of to himself. Imagine, there's people yelling, camels, smells, whatever, and he takes a child and he said, bring the child here. And he says this to people. He took a little child and called the child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. It's pretty profound. That Jesus would say that there's something about a child that kind of will help you understand what you need to be open to understand God's ways in this world. And I remember like growing up and thinking, what does that even mean? And I'll tell you the day that this really kind of struck me in a new way. Like really I thought, I need to understand this in a deeper way. And it's the day I understood the difference between these two words. You can just go to the slide with the two words, these two words, okay? To be childlike and to be childish. Oftentimes, I think about growing up and thinking about kids, and I think kids are just childish. How many of you can think of this week when you saw a child who was childish, right? I was like at Walmart or like a Maxi or whatever. You're there, and everybody's waiting in line, and there's one kid who's like, Mom, can you buy me this? Can I have this? Can I buy this? You're kind of like, there's some childishness there, right? Or I was at the store with my kids a little while ago just doing some groceries, and if this ever happened to you, and my kids are a bit older, so this is surprising, and I get to the thing to pay, and there's all these things in the cart that I didn't put in there. I was like, huh? I'm like, who put the Nutella in here? And my son's like, I don't know, I thought you wanted to get it, Dad. I'm like, no, I didn't. Put it away. So it's like kids do childish things. But then there's to be childlike. To be open to the mystery, the story, the meaning, the power of what God might do in our lives when we really surrender. And I want you to just think about it in this way. To be childlike is the secret of Christmas in this way. A child always knows that they depend on someone else for their life. Always. A child has an ability to always be aware of their dependence on someone else. Always. My kids, like, I don't know, maybe at Christmas time for you, you have a wonderful family, you all hug and do prayers and it's all magical. But in my house, it's chaos, okay? Like we're working on the parenting skills and, my kids get mad. They can't play video games as long as they want to, or they didn't do their homework. And a few weeks ago, we had this moment where our son got so mad, he started losing it. Like just losing his mind. Maybe you have kids like that. If you don't, come to our house, you can help us with ours. He starts to lose it. He starts to say this. It happens every time. He's like, I hate this house. I hate everything. Like once you say that the hate word, I turn into a new kind of person, right? I just show him, like, did you just say hate? He's like, I hate everything. I hate this. He's just yelling. I'm moving out, he said. I'm like, well, what? He was so mad, and he's stomping up to his room. And as he's stomping to his room, he looks down, and he says, Mom, can you make spaghetti and meatballs for dinner? I was like, the nerve. And I had this moment because I was thinking about this sermon, and I was thinking about Christmas, and I was like, that's exactly what childlike dependence looks like. That no matter how tough you think you are, no matter how angry you're going to be, there's a moment where a child's like, by the way, let's not get carried away. Who's making dinner? Like, how are we going to break this down? And then, we try to teach our kids because they love eating. And so sometimes we're like, well, you can have dinner, but you're not having what you asked for. You're having, vegetables and broccoli. And they're like, no, there is no God. Whatever. This morning, if you remember anything, remember that God at Christmas gives us all a gift. And he asks us to be childlike again. He asks us in different ways, by the way, because we're all different. But he asks us if we're willing to depend on him the way kids have to depend on their parents. He just asks, are you willing to do that? Are you willing to depend on my love, my forgiveness, my strength, my vision for your life? Are you willing to depend on me? Kids don't have a problem with that at all. They just get it. They're like, everything works because they depend on their parents or someone, their teacher, to remind them about their homework and to put your shoes and you need a hat. And it's a continual framework of depending on someone. Jesus will say that to his followers. And I think we lose the meaning of Christmas, and we kind of start to outgrow Christmas when we think Christmas is just for the kids. It's so nice. I mean, it's so great, the kids. Now, if you don't have a Bible, or if you've never read the Bible, you might not know this, but in the Bible, there's a story that we're told about Christmas. Actually, the Christmas story weaves itself in different ways in the Bible. And if you want one, we can give you one. If you've never read a Bible or you need help with one, we'd love to give you one for free. You can grab it on your way out today. But one of the people in the Bible that's really important to understand is the person that everybody had to learn to depend on in the Bible. He is the most powerful person in the Bible, and he's the emperor of Rome. And Luke, in his gospel, will tell us just a little snapshot of who he is and something that he does that reminds everybody that everybody in the ancient world on that first Christmas, right, depends on the power of the government, depends on the power of an empire, no matter how tough they think they are. When the emperor says something, people do it. And this is what we're told. This is what Luke says. See behind me. It says, in those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a consensus should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And everyone went to their own town to register. I mean, the emperor had spoken. And you know what? If you wanted to eat, if you wanted to live, if you wanted to survive, you depended on the emperor. The Roman Empire at the time of Christmas in the Bible was such a powerful machine, they invented branding. They invented what it's like to scare people before you even show up. It's what we call bullying. Okay? The Romans were so good at this that when a new emperor came into power in the ancient world, because they couldn't tell everybody, imagine you lived on a town far away in the middle of nowhere, like RDP, right? If you're online, you're listening to a podcast, just Google Map RDP. Okay, whatever. My brother lives there. It's in the middle of nowhere. So it's in the east end of Montreal, right? You're out there. How would you know if a new leader changed in another part of the city? You have no internet. You have to hope you get a pigeon that sends you a letter. Well, the Romans were brilliant. The Romans are like, you know what? When a new emperor comes into power, we're going to start making coins right away with the new emperor on them so that when people start to barter, they realized money was the fastest moving thing in the ancient world. That if you went to a port, that you went to barter with someone, as soon as people got new money, they're like, wait a second, I think it happened. It's official. There's a new emperor, a new ruler. If you weren't sure about who you were going to depend on, just look at the money in your pockets. That's who you depend on. And the Romans also had a word for people who did not depend on the emperor. They had a word that they would start to use as a common word, and this is a word that's going to be used of Christians. Some of you maybe know this, because I've shared it before, we've talked about it in a class. But the Romans will call those who don't depend on Rome, those who don't depend on the empire, those who don't depend on the gods of Rome, they are called atheists. Think about how crazy that is, that the first time the idea of atheist is used is not for people who don't believe in God, it's about Christians. Christians were called atheists in the ancient Roman Empire because they didn't believe in all the gods. They believed in one God. And he came, they say, in the form of a baby. How ridiculous. Who believes that? And whenever they forgot that, the emperor was like, we're going to help them remember that that's not true. Yeah, you have a ruler. He's going to be the new king. Yeah, okay, we get it. Crucify him. It'll take a while, but we'll get there. Hope we see you at Easter. But that's the whole point. That you have this moment where in the Christmas story, everybody has been taught to depend on something else, and maybe God if you have time. You depend on everything else and the empire, and you go where the governor says, and you make sure you do everything. And then if there's time, you could go worship. Yeah, whatever. Go to church, go to the temple, do whatever you want. You know, we live in a world that is the same today. I was wrestling with this as I was working on my sermon, and I thought, I should maybe write down all the things I depend on. Like for some of you, if you've never done this, it's a great exercise. You could do it this week. You could do it when you're quietly, having coffee. I made 2 columns, and I made a list of all the people I depend on in one, and then I put God in the other. You'll see it behind me. There we go. I just did it as a practice for myself. Any of you guys depend on any of these people? The mechanic dude, I have a mechanic dude. You need a mechanic dude. How many of you have an internet galler dude? Every family needs an IT specialista. Oh yeah, if you don't have that, in the future you're doomed. You won't even matter to us. All the things, I'm like, I depend on all these people. I depend on them doing what they have to do. And I thought, but the truth is that in my heart, I really depend on God. And so can I just encourage you to think about this? That to be childlike is not that you don't depend on others, but that others know that you depend on God first. We're made to depend on others. We just do. But the others that we depend on, do they know that we first depend on God? Think about the people in your family. Do they know that you are the kind of person in the midst of stress, in the midst of chaos, in the midst of joy, in the midst of whatever, that you're the kind of person that lives a life that very clearly seems to depend on God? Are you that kind of person? There's been times in my life where I wasn't that person. I remember times in my life so vividly where I depended on all these people, and when these people let me down, then I went to God. You ever do that? You're like, I'm going to do all these things, and if they're all like losers, I picked the wrong people to have in my life, right? I'm like, oh God, if you're real today and this comes through, I'm in. I'll be a monk, whatever. Like you have the radical picture of how it works. That's how most people live their lives, by the way. Like I'm going to depend on me, depend on this, depend on that. And if it all falls apart, maybe there's a God. And if there is, let's try him out. At Christmas, we all get a chance to wrestle with what we really depend on. What do you depend on? Who do you depend on? And are you able this year, for the first time, to make a list, look at the list, and say, I'm going to make a list, and I'm going to just pray that this Christmas I learn to have God first, and I'll depend on him. And then my children and my friends and my family, my mechanic and my internet guy and this and that and our church, and we'll see that as much as I would love to do life with them, I still first and foremost depend on God. If we do this, we will give our kids the greatest Christmas gift they've ever gotten. We will model for the next generation what it's like to be people whose lives are rooted in a God who promises to enter our story and to do something that we could not do for ourselves. Take a minute. What would be on your list? And what would it take for you to just say, this Christmas, I'm going to be childlike. I'm not going to be childish. I'm going to be childlike. I'm going to reflect again on what it means to depend on God. Now, if it's not enough for you to think about it this way, the next part of the story in Luke is going to tell us about a couple who is the center of the whole Christmas story, who's learning to depend on God. They are. They have nothing. We know who they are. I'll read it for you. You'll see behind me, and that's what it says. So Joseph, because he belonged to the house and the line of David, remember there's a census that they have to go to their hometown, he went there to register with Mary. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. She gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in a cloth, in clothes, and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. You know, in our culture, sometimes the word guest room gets translated in, but the actual idea is a guest room. There was no room. I think we have some people here at a church, and I've seen a few of you here. God's blessed us this year with so many kids, and some of you are pregnant, you're having kids, and 2020 is going to be like, the year you never go on vacation again, like that year. And so, I think of all that, and I think about how beautiful it is that we live in a time where we're learning to have like a baby shower in a church, and we're going to do the collection, and we're going to help you, and you need stuff. My cousin, think about Mary and Joseph. They have nothing. She's having a baby. There's no stroller. There's no monitor. There's no special bottle that talks and sings when the baby doesn't eat. There's nothing. There's no one to depend on. She's not calling her mom in the middle of the night to say, what do I do? They have fever. How does that work? Mary and Joseph are the great reminders to us at Christmas what it looks like when you depend on God. What it looks like when you have nothing else. And Joseph is like, I had a dream. I believe this is really God doing something in us. I don't even know how to explain it. And now they have a baby. And now there's not even a place for them to lie down with the baby. They're like in a manger place where there's all the animals. You know how hard it would be to be them? To be like, okay, Joseph, do one of those prayers that we learned when we were kids. Read one of the Psalms. Recite one of the Psalms from the prophets. We're going to have to depend on God now. We really are. When's the last time you really had to depend on God? When's the last time you were obedient enough to be in a situation where you knew only God could help you? When's the last time you did that? I know a lot of people in their whole lives, they never have to do that. You know why? If you're taking notes, write this down. Because we're rich. That's why. We don't have to depend on anything. We're just like, whatever, I'll figure it out. Somebody will get some money. We get a loan. I have a visa. I can pay it back later. We have all kinds of systems, checks and balances, so you never really have to really depend on God. Never. You never get Christmas. You never really get the true meaning of Christmas if you don't receive it in some ways like a child, where they learn what it means to depend on God. One of my prayers for our church in 2020 is that God would put us in situations where we are stuck and we just have to depend on Him. One of my prayers for you is that 2020, this new year, would be the year where you find yourself being so obedient and so trusting of God that you find yourself in a place where you're like, we have to just depend on God. I don't know. Because when you don't do that and when you don't learn to live that way, you never experience the miracle of what it's like for God to answer your prayers, for God to really show up in your life. We don't. And when that happens, Christmas loses all of its meaning. Christmas just gets lost in the mix. I'm going to invite the team to come up, and we're going to do a song, and we often do a song just to kind of wrap up our morning, kind of to give us a chance to maybe sing or pray or say, before I leave today, God, I want to deal with some of the stuff I'm carrying. But over the Christmas break, I sometimes do this. I have people in my family that I love, that I care about, who don't really believe in God. They definitely don't believe in Christmas. They don't believe in any of this religion stuff. They're just like, this is annoying. And so sometimes I'll read a book, or I'll kind of try to get into their headspace and be like, God, what would it mean to be, journeying with somebody, or listening with somebody, or praying for somebody who just doesn't believe this? It totally makes sense. I remember in my life when I didn't believe this. And so I started reading this book. It's a popular book. You're going to hear about it, and you put it up on the screen. It's called Outgrowing God. And it's by one of the most important atheists that's alive today, Richard Dawkins. And I don't recommend everybody read it. It's a difficult book to read. But as I read through the book, as I'm going through the book now, and I'm thinking about it, I'm like, this is really the way our culture really understands faith, religion, God. That at some point, you're going to outgrow God. Like at some point, you should just outgrow all this magical God in the sky and move on with your life. And the timing of the book is always perfect, right? It comes out when? I think 3 weeks before Christmas. Of course, well done, publishers, if you're watching. All right. It's perfect. So as I'm reading this, I'm like, you know what? I know the feeling. And I know people who are like, Christmas, are you guys going to outgrow this? Are you going to kind of just move on and just, it's great. The traditions are great and the rituals are great. Because there's a lot of options at Christmas. But the biblical option, the option of Mary and Joseph, and the option of the Christmas story is God saying to us, you could do that, or you can learn to depend on me in a new way. you can learn to really understand that Christmas is bigger than just kids play and musical and songs that we love to sing, and all those things are not necessarily bad things. What would it take this Christmas for you to depend on God? What would it take? What would God have to do for you to learn to depend on God? I hate to tell you, I've been a pastor a long time, and it breaks my heart to be with people who sometimes need the worst of the worst of the worst to happen to them before they can say, okay, I'm going to depend on God now. I don't know, the doctors don't know, my family don't know, I don't know. At Christmas, we get a chance not to do that. We get a chance now to say that whatever comes my way, whatever happens, whoever drops the ball, whoever hurts me, whoever's not dependable in my life, I'm going to choose first to depend on God. I'm going to have you stand and sing the song with us. And you know what? Maybe you don't know the words or you don't want to sing. You're not a singing kind of person. But would you just be open to the fact that God might be trying to show you a way that you can depend on Him? A way that you can trust Him and know that He's really part of your story. That God has written Himself into the story of our world for our sake. Let God speak to you now as we sing the song.